Hey, for the latest news, go to SCTE.org for standards, training, certification, events, even membership. Everything you need to know, SCTE.org.
This is where the rubber starts to meet the road. One of the things that we also know in anybody's system, I'm sorry, this is just the way it is. Mike and I spend a lot of time talking about this. We are trying to overcome this. Can I be honest? Most of the way people were trained is, here you go, good luck. Yeah, I get that.
Figure it out.
Yeah, figure it out. And then unfortunately, by the time you are the third or the fourth generation trained, you may have learned some of this wrong. You may have never learned it at all. This is the part where a lot of people were never taught. This is why a lot of people miss a lot of problems, because they do not understand pulse widths. Okay, so here we go.
Well, I think to exacerbate that, if you're a technician and you get a piece of test equipment that you don't understand and you don't know how to use, it's not going to be successful for you. And if it's not useful and if it's not successful in helping you find problems, do you continue to use it? In most cases, no, right? So technicians, if they don't have the training and the comfortability of using a piece of test equipment, a lot of times it just collects dust in the back of the truck.
And that is worse, and that is worse. But also, by not learning some of these things properly, this is where a lot of people start to realize why they missed obvious things, or why they thought brand A was better than brand B, but what they really didn't know, they didn't understand what it could do, just so you understand. So let's start first of all. The way the TDR launches its signal is by what's called a pulse width. This is a time-based instrument, so it's measured in time, nanoseconds, microseconds. It also has a frequency side to it, but I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. So let's talk about just my analogy, first of all, the way the pulse widths work. Most TDRs have a variety of pulse widths that you can either select or it can select for you. I like to think of the way the TDR is launching its signal, here comes one of my analogies, as if you take a rope along the ground and you flip it. You know that wave that goes down? This is a reflectometer, of course, so it comes back. If I take that rope and I give it a huge amount of energy, a large whip, it's going to go a greater distance. Versus if I give it just a little tiny flick of the wrist, it won't go as far. So you could say that your larger pulse widths are for going longer distances or for testing longer lengths of cable, and your smaller pulse widths are for testing shorter lengths of cable. And while that is partially true, there's a little bit more to it than that as well. Each individual pulse width has at least two basic things that are associated with it: a maximum footage range and a blind spot or a dead zone. But first, let me ask you a question, and I'm going to use Mike as my audience here. Mike, can a TDR see through taps?
Yes.
Yes, it can. Can a TDR see through amps?
Sort of.
Sort of, and the reason Mike says sort of is because a TDR will not see through them, but typically it can see to them, because you will, in most cases, if you know what you're looking for, recognize what that signature looks like. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
Okay, go ahead.
While we're talking about the blind spot, sometimes I've heard this called an initial launch reflection, right?
I'm about to go deep into that, by the way, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So as with anything, when you're transmitting a signal through connectors that may have a very small impedance mismatch,
Yep.
just like an MTDR is looking for, it's going to see some of that signal coming back. Is that what creates the blind spot?
Not exactly, but ask me that question in just a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna go with a TDR cannot see through amps. Can a TDR see through DCs, splitters?
Yes, although as with the directional coupler, that signal gets divided unequally and it may return a reflection on both legs, which are then combined. So it gets a little tricky trying to TDR through splitters and directional couplers.
Exactly. So it will go through, but it's going to go in both directions. Bottom line, the reason why you need to understand that as a technician is because once you do see a DC, as soon as you see something after that, from here, you don't know which leg it's going down. So a TDR can see through passives. It cannot see through actives. Now, there's a reason why I say that, which I will talk about in just a little bit. First of all, let's just talk about maximum footage range. Each TDR pulse will go a maximum footage range. That's as far as that signal will go. And I'm just going to take a pulse width that's just somewhere in the middle, just kind of an average pulse width. Let's just say a 2 nanosecond pulse width. If I tell you that it will go 1,500 feet, that's just a given. That's what it is. But these numbers, first of all, are just abouts. There are so many variables to why this can happen. Everybody always wants to know, just tell me what the signatures look like. What does water look like? What does a tap of a certain value look like? What's a good splice versus a bad splice? You guys, here's the deal. I don't want you to get too caught up in what the signature looks like first. I want you to be more concerned with where it is than what it is. Remember, I already told you that most things you're looking for are going to be easy to find. We'll figure out the what it is later on. But I also want you to pay attention to what the signal is doing. For instance, if I tell you that a 2 nanosecond pulse width will go up to 1,500 feet, picture this. Sometimes in other applications, I've seen a 2 nanosecond pulse width go 3,000 or 4,000 feet. Now, we don't go that far in cable TV, but I do have other power applications where we do need to see that far. Sometimes I've seen a 2 nanosecond pulse width go 4,000 feet. Sometimes I've seen it go only 2 to 5 or 600 feet. My point to that is if you ever see a 2 nanosecond pulse width only going just a couple hundred feet, I need you to ask yourself, why is that? Why did that signal only go that far? Maybe my jumper cable is faulty. Maybe my F connector is loose. Maybe my BNC connector has failed or is failing. These things do fail, right? Maybe the BNC connector on the front or the back of my TDR is failing or loose. Maybe that first reflection that I'm wondering what it is, maybe that's where the water is in my cable. Because at some point, and we all have water in the cable issues, that might suck up your signal a lot. I just want you to also pay attention to what the signal is doing. So we understand maximum footage range in general, right? Let's go back to this in just a second. Let's talk about blind spots, okay? The blind spot or the dead zone, these are a time-based instrument, right? So the amount of time that it takes that signal to launch can also be equated to a distance. So if I tell you, and I'm just going to go with a middle number here, 100 nanosecond pulse width. If 100 nanosecond pulse width has a 50-foot blind spot, remember that rope analogy that I gave that gets launched right here? It takes 50 feet for that signal to launch. That's what I mean by blind spot. You're not going to see anything within the first 50 feet if you're looking at 100 nanosecond pulse width. So picture this theoretically. And this, again, is not that theoretical. Let's say I have a buried pedestal right here. And if I were connected right here, and I couldn't see the first 50 or so feet of my cable, what would be the odds that I could have a problem somewhere in that first 50 feet? Pretty high, right? Because of that bend right there. So back then, we would always tell someone, if you're using a TDR that has a 50-foot blind spot, make sure you're using at least a 50-foot jumper so that by the time your signal is live, you're seeing everything right here, right? Now, obviously, at some point, I'm going to ask you to go over to the other side and shoot back, but not just so you can get closer to the event if it's on the other side, but so you can back up and get a better view. But picture this. Over the years, we in the TDR industry have improved upon these pulse widths, and eventually most people had a 25 or a 2 nanosecond pulse width. And when you get down to about a 2 or let's say a 5 nanosecond pulse width, which has a blind spot of anywhere from let's say 3 to 5 or 6 feet, that's when it became the industry standard to say a 6-foot jumper will do. I'm just telling you, that's how we got there. Now, over the years, other manufacturers have come out with a 1 or a sub-nanosecond pulse width. A sub-nanosecond pulse width, when Riserbond came up with that years ago, we called it a sub because it was less than 1 nanosecond. Had a 6-inch blind spot. That literally meant you could see something 6 inches from the front panel of your TDR. But I'm telling you, I'm not saying that all you need now is just a 6-inch jumper, because the truth is you're going to look a little bit silly here trying to connect with this 6-inch jumper and see your screen at the same time. That's not why I tell you that. Understand this.